Yo, what's up, fam? If you enjoy the PODI-CAST and you want to help us keep the lights on right here, here's a super easy way. Here is a QR code, okay? All you got to do is scan it and be able to get the Ponesa link. And in that way, you'll be able to help us, I don't know, man. Make sure we get the freshest guest every single time. And in that way, you're also able to get yourself airtime. You're able to buy yourself even electricity right on the same app. And in that way, we're able to keep ourselves going, okay? We get a little something, Yana, if you use the app from over here. So remember, the QR code is right here. Click onto it. Buy yourself airtime from any of the telecom companies, Orange, BTC, Mascom, or you can also get yourself some BPC electricity, and we can all keep building together. So remember, ow!
People of different identities. Podcast with PODI-CAST.
Yo, what's happening, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the PODI-CAST with your host, SCAR, and we're coming at you straight from Leo's Inn right here in Gaborone. That's where you catch us every single Wednesday, and like we always say, come through, come see it for yourself. The garden is looking absolutely amazing. You can come through for events. You can come through for all kinds of different things. Or if you want somewhere where you can accommodate your family, your friends, this is such a really good spot. It's also got self-catering. They can buy their own groceries. They can cook for themselves. So please make sure you check them out. They're on Facebook. They're everywhere. They're in Tsabong, they're in Gaborone, and they're also in Mogoditani. A big shout out also going out to our beverage sponsor, Team Agencies. Today, I'm going to be the only one drinking today, so bear with me. It is delicious. It's called, it's a Shiraz, Land of the Giants. All right, so that's what I'm going to be on. You can check it out on at Sefalana Liquor. It's also available at Liquorama, all right, all over Botswana. But hey, this is not what we're here for. We're here for that also, but not completely. We're here for our guests every single Wednesday. We try to get you as many voices that we've heard over the years, but also have wanted to have conversations with myself. I'm being a bit selfish here because, you see names flying around and you know how much impact they have in our society, in how we look at things, how, public discourse is handled around government, around a whole lot of things, and especially his knowledge about history of Botswana, especially the Kwening district, because, I'm from Molepole, so I'm a bit biased about that. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jeff Ramsay is a prominent historian and educator who's based in Botswana. He's renowned for his extensive work on the nation's history and media landscape. He's actually senior vice principal.
I'm principal.
Principal now at the Livingston Kulubin College. He's also been at Lagaya Academy.
I was principal there too.
Principal at Lagaya Academy. And his academic journey, he's got a PhD from Boston University, which he completed in 1991. What were you doing in 1991? Some people were not even born who are holding these cameras here. But yeah, a lot of us know him because he's influenced Botswana's media and communication sector. From 2003 to 2018, he held the position of Deputy Permanent Secretary for Media within the Ministry of Communication, Science and Technology. And I think that was the beginning of how we got a mouthpiece for the BW government. I don't think there had ever been that department before. It was pretty new. But we'll get into all of that. Guys, I can't tell the story. This is why he's here. Give it up for Dr. Jeff Ramsay. Hi, sir.
Hello.
Why are you making me drink alone?
Well, I must say, for many years, I loved wine. Mm-hmm. But in 2023, I took a month challenge.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I won't drink for a month. And then I felt fine. So I said, okay, I'll try another month. And I just kept going.
Yeah.
I've never, I haven't converted to Islam or anything. I haven't, sworn off, but I haven't drunk any wine since July 2023.
And I think that's what a lot of people say about quitting, that you really don't have to announce it.
No.
If you really mean it, you just do it for yourself, and then it just keeps happening like that.
Yeah, and as you get older, it's probably good.
Yeah.
For one.
Health-wise.
But I'm not ragging on wine. I had many nice times with company and wine in the past.
We really, really appreciate you coming through here and talking to us. I think they are very intriguing because a lot of the time when people see your name, it's usually on the newspapers, and it's a piece about our history, about Botswana history. And I've always wondered to myself, it's like, where do you get these stories? Like, I think that's what the main thing is. A lot of the time, a lot of us wonder how you know all of this, but it has to start from somewhere. So I think we really need to start it from where you are from, where you were born, and how did you end up in Botswana?
I was born in a city called Baltimore.
Okay.
It's near Washington, D.C., and I spent most of my childhood there. I was a little bit in Chicago. So yes, I grew up in the United States, and went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Philadelphia.
Okay.
That's where I did my undergraduate. Then I decided to take a year, get a master's degree in African history at Boston University, which then had a leading African studies center.
Okay.
And since they were paying for my schooling, I just kept going.
Who was paying for your school?
The Boston University.
Okay.
I had a fellowship with them.
Awesome.
And also, in my first year, I met my wife. She was then Sakabo Basmani Botle.
Okay.
And she's from Mashupa, so okay, Mokwe Yaba Katla Bahamanana.
Yes, sir.
And things kept happening. And in 1984, we first came here. And we were here till, well, and put it this way, in 1988, we went back to do some further graduate work, both my wife and I.
Okay.
But we had lived in Boston together before. And we were married in Boston. And actually, then we finished in 1990, actually, we came back here. They published the thesis in 91. But
Yeah.
so, mostly I've been here since 1984.
Oh.
And one of the last things he did one of the things he did in his last day of office, Sir Ketemili Masiri, was to just sign my citizenship papers.
Yeah. That's awesome. Like, for a lot of people, that can't imagine themselves moving from where they're from and going to a completely different place. What was it for you? Like, what was the deal? I mean, I know the missus was probably part of it, So what was like the hook?
Of course, we had to go one place or another.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the material rewards for both of us in America were huge. I had an offer from Dartmouth College, for example.
Yeah.
To teach there, and I'd been a teaching fellow at Harvard as well as Boston University. And my wife, she's a physiotherapist. She had endless offers to work in any part of the U.S., especially when she had her master's.
Yeah.
So, but we just, when we were here, I mean, we found it, I guess, challenging. It became my home, and of course, it was her home.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think about it much. We just stayed, and now I've lived most of my life here.
So with the interest in Botswana's history, do you know what sparked it for you?
Well, first of all, I've been always interested in history from the time I was even in primary school. And then I got interested in African history. I mean, initially my vision of Africa is coming from media, and it was a very distorted vision.
Yeah.
If you're growing up in the 1960s and 70s in America. But I read a biography about Haile Selassie. So that kind of opened me up to a deeper, more serious approach to African history.
Awesome.
I was interested in Southern Africa. I did come here to Southern Africa one summer in 76. I moved around a bit. And so then when I went to Boston University in 1980, I thought I'd just do a master's initially. I did focus on Southern Africa, and I was already drawn to Botswana. I don't know why, but I was.
How is it? Like, for someone who would try and imagine, like, how it was, you got apartheid South Africa next door, you got what's going on in Namibia as well. What type of place was it to be in Botswana? Because some of us know about the bombings in Botawu.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that. We hear about it because we were young. Some guys still have sinus problems because apparently there was tear gas everywhere, and there were kids, who bore the brunt of what was going on. Can you paint a little picture?
Well, I'm sure in South Africa it was that way, but here it was, there's the quote from Tale of Two Cities, best of times and worst of times.
Yeah.
My wife and I were young. It was very vibrant in Gaborone, even though Gaborone was much smaller than it is now.
Yeah.
When I was initially here, we had Hugh Masekela playing at the Oasis, all kinds of people coming and going. We had the Medu Arts and the likes. But then very soon thereafterwards, in 1985, June 14th, there was that horrible raid by the South African security forces.
Yeah.
And that shook the town deeply. I can tell you, after that happened and the murders happened, people were just walking around almost like zombies that weekend. And yeah, I mean, among the people who were killed, we knew people who were killed, and we also, well, first of all, we didn't know the Polys so well, but they lived 4 houses from us.
Yeah.
So we heard all of that while we were, crouching in our house.
Jesus.
But then we knew the Gears. There was Ahmed Gear, who was murdered, and his wife, who was wounded, and Mike Hamlin. We had just gotten to know them, only known them for a couple months. So, yeah, like I say, it was very vibrant city, very exciting city, but we were living in the shadow of the apartheid regime. And so there was danger. And people lived, always with that in the back of their minds.
How were like the population, like the normal people? How were they treating the situation in South Africa? Because I think when we think about where Botswana was, it was like maybe we were just neutral, we were just waiting to take people in. But were there people who are actively trying to help out these people?
There absolutely were, and I knew some of them. But since I wasn't engaged,
yes, sir.
You knew where to go and where not to go in terms of, like, I knew some people who I just knew they had links to the MK, but I never would bring it up. I would never, you would hold back and suppress a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that was true of, I think, many people in the country and in the town. Eventually, although I didn't know it at the time, but Masiri and Thabo Mbeki talked about it a couple years ago, there came to be a we don't see you, you don't see us policy.
Yeah.
So that the government did know that there were MK as well, but they were playing a very cautious game, but still supporting the struggle. Otherwise, very openly, we were, from the 1960s, I could speak here as a historian, but from the 1980s when I was a witness, we were where refugees, freedom fighters, came to, sometimes fled to.
Yeah.
So there was that never-ending incidents, and one just sort of kept to oneself about those things. To give one example, as a historian, of course, I was somewhat interested, and as a young person. And one of the people I knew who was a hero at that time, and I knew he was in town, was Fish Kit Singh. I knew of him even when I was in Boston. But I didn't even dare to introduce myself to Fish Kit Singh until 1994.
After all of it was now...
After I saw Mandela inaugurated,
Yeah.
then I thought, okay, now I can go say hello to Fish Kit Singh. And I did, and that's how I, along with Barry Morton, ended up helping him compile his memoirs.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. I love to hear it. So can we talk a little bit about like the work that you got into when you got into Botswana? Did you get into research? Did you get immediately into teaching?
Well, I had 2 fellowships, one, a Fulbright Hayes, and was a Social Sciences Research Council of North America. So those 2 awards gave me some money.
Were you like some brilliant student or something? You keep getting these fellowships and sponsorships, like.
Well, I guess I wasn't an idiot, but I wouldn't claim to be a genius.
Yeah, but not everyone gets sponsorships like that.
No,
though.
they don't. But I think it was as much focus.
Okay.
And it's that old adage of perspiration and inspiration.
Yeah.
I think it was the focus. But at any rate, I managed to get those 2 awards. And then for better or worse for Botswana, but it was very good for me. The pula went down against the dollar, and my awards were in the dollar, so that basically doubled their value locally.
Awesome.
So at that point, I was an associate with what was then the National Research Institute, I think it was called, but it was part of the University of Botswana.
Okay.
And so I was a fellow there. I attended seminars at UB History. I was working with people who were there, like Michael Crowder. There was whom else? There was so many people at that time, but some of the people that were particularly stood out were the students themselves, because at that time they were doing their student theses, their undergraduate theses, and a lot of good work was being produced.
Awesome stuff.
And so, and during that period, we produced a book called Birth of Botswana. Fred Morton and I edited it, but it had lots of different authors. Neil Parsons was around at that time. Tom Tlow was around at that time.
Thomas Tlow. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are some big names. But how hard was it? Can you share like the challenges of doing research in Botswana and documenting Botswana's history?
I don't think it was exceptionally challenging because people in Botswana were open.
But a lot of you and the likes of, let's say, Thomas Tlow are like way more published than, I guess, a lot more. Maybe you are more famous in your names and stuff, but like how easy was it for you guys to keep putting out books, contributing to journals and stuff like that, which I don't think happens as much as it does now?
Maybe not, but if you have a passion for something, whether it's in music or you with your podcast, but myself with researching and writing history and collaborating with others in history. If it's your passion, it's not like a job. It's just something you just want to do. Yeah. So, but the other thing, I think one of my frustrations has also been my motivation in that in Botswana we haven't been teaching history in our schools, and because of that, the history seems underdeveloped at a popular level. Yeah. Now, the truth is that indigenous scholars, non-indigenous scholars like myself, outside scholars, there's been a lot of writing and research about Botswana history. There can always be more. But there's been quite a lot of research, and books have been produced. Numerous articles have been produced right now. I'm working on a bibliography, and I'm trying to decide which researches since, was it 2017, 2018, I should be including because there's so many. Yeah. And so that has been done, but it hasn't permeated to society. So initially I linked up with Mechi and was writing occasionally in the 80s and then full-time, like weekly in the 90s, and doing columns that were either history or history and current events combined. Yeah. Sometimes I was also just doing some plain journalism here and there. Yeah. So that got me started. But what was encouraging is people, there was a demand for it. Yeah. And a seeming dearth of this history at a popular level, plus, a lot of myths about the history. One of the things I researched was the Batswana Boer War, and I discovered it wasn't well documented, it wasn't well covered. Yeah. Shapir had collected a lot of information that was useful, and I was able to collect a lot more because there were sources available. Yeah. But if you asked Batswana at that time, the Demawe battle was, for example, not really known. Now it's become something of a subject. Yeah. Sechele's leadership was really not well known. And in fact, it's embarrassing because while there was no mention of Demawe, the Batswana Boer War, in local textbooks, it did have mention in the textbooks in the then Bantustan of Botswana.
Oh, okay. So, but then that begs the question, why does the history usually feel like it starts at like 1840? And, I'm going to go into like something that I had a conversation with my friends about. We'll be watching like Roman Empire movies where it's something BC, whatever. And for us, it always looks like it starts at like 1800s. And there's nothing that's documented before then. So I've always wanted to ask that question is, why does it seem like Difagane and all of those. It's like usually where our
Yeah.
history has been documented from.
Well, there is quite a good bit of documentation of a sort before 1800. I must admit, though, even myself, I prefer to start at least in the 1600s. I don't, when I go back further, I know I'm dealing with legends and stuff.
Yeah.
So the problem is basically writing.
Yeah, no one was
We have material sources of Botswana history, so there's plenty of archaeology. It tells us an awful lot about many things, but it can't tell us certain things.
Yeah.
A pot can tell you that this type of, pot and other artifacts can tell you how people lived. With enough detective work, you might even have a good idea who these people might have been, who their ancestors of who. You can certainly say there was an Iron Age civilization in the region. But because Setswana was not really written down to the 1800s, and there was very few Europeans, virtually none before 1800 passing through, it isn't quite the history that I prefer, but I would love to go back to the 11th century,
Yeah.
There, like I say, and plenty of others, the archaeologists, they do that, and all power to them. Why do I say I prefer the 1800s? I like the material evidence. I like the oral traditions and but I also want, documentation where I can get it. Because what I like about history is studying people.
Yeah.
I want to know their names, what they were like, some of their daily actions.
Yeah. Personality.
And oral traditions, they do give us a picture of 1600s. Then we have king lists that go back to supposedly the beginning of time in some cases. Like Matsiang is supposed to be the first person, and all Batswana and other Dikosi claim to be ancestors of Matsiang, who came out with Loe at Rasesa. So those legends,
whole giant.
Loe was actually the giant according to Sequena sources. Okay. I love that sort of stuff, but then I like to get to, events like Batswana Boer War and the likes, where I see individuals that can be connected and have that more rounded type of history. But that's a common challenge with much of Africa. If we were to go to Ethiopia or some of these other places, we can go back before the Romans. I mean, the Ethiopians had their Aksumite empire during the time of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So it's just the peculiarities.
Yeah, I wish we had more, for real. But we really appreciate what you do give us as well, which is why it's so awesome that we get to talk to you today. And I want to ask about, what do you think many younger Batswana might not be fully aware of, as far as certain historical events and, what we can learn from them?
Well, the first thing is that we have a very rich history.
Yeah.
And even if we go into the archaeology, there is a theory that we may even be the cradle of humankind, modern humans, Homo sapiens.
Was it on National Geographic or something?
Yeah.
It came out of nowhere.
And it's based on the fact that the ecology of this area has changed, and that this region more generally, if not Botswana by itself, certainly southern Africa, southern eastern Africa, is where we know of Homo sapiens, that is, modern human populations emerging. There is a theory that because what we now know is the Kalahari Desert was once very lush, because what we know today as the Zambezi River used to run down to the Limpopo. And so the places like Makadikadi were big lakes. There's a belief that's where the belief comes that because all these Homo sapiens are in the region, that probably the center might have been Botswana. So we might have been the Garden of Eden. Who knows?
Does anyone else care about it as much as we do? I mean, I saw some documentaries on it, but is it as a big a deal to the rest of the world as it is to us, though?
Well, not necessarily, but it's never going to be. Like, Russian history was fascinating to me as a child, but it probably would not have reached me if the Russians themselves weren't fascinated by their own history, or the French with their history.
Yeah.
China, they're definitely absolutely proud of their history. So we have to embrace our history. And like I say, we can take it all the way back. There is that, to take another ancient example, there is this snake carving at Sodillo Hills, heritage site. which may have been the first. It probably was used, they believe, in some kind of ritual, maybe worship. It probably meant something.
Yeah.
And some people say it's 73,000 years old,
The
which
archaeologists.
is massively old.
That's really old.
It may be a little less old, but we're talking tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
The Sodilo paintings, some of them are extremely ancient.
You just mentioned something about like how history is not being taken seriously in schools. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but like, it's not as prominent or Botswana history. Why is that from what you've paid attention to?
I honestly don't know. I think some progress was being made, and then they introduced social studies. And when they did introduce social studies, I was around at the time, they claimed that this would combine history and geography and that it would localize the history.
I used to pass it.
Yes.
I don't know what that thing was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think
It was a bit of geography because we had the atlas.
Yeah.
There was a bit of, you get to learn about, the tools that were being used, like the ones that you're mentioning, us getting into it wasn't industrial age at the time. It was
Well, there was a Stone Age and then the Iron Age.
The iron. It was the iron stuff. But I never really knew what social studies was all about. So that's what replaced history.
Yeah, it did, up until JC. And then the history we were teaching at then Cambridge O-level was, it was supposed to be Southern Africa, but it was dominated by Central Africa and South Africa. In Mfakani, we had a lot about Shaka. We had some things about history in Central Africa, that is Zambia, Zimbabwe, Central Africa, which had been British colonies, of course, in the past. But Botswana history was not developed.
Yeah.
And there was a myth. I mean, if you go to the last Botswanaland handbook, official handbook in 1965, it has a long quote right on page 1 about, it starts with, if happy is a nation that has no history, if this be true, there can be few nations happier in the world than Botswanaland. And it just goes on from there. And it contextualizes the quote that Seretse Khama did 5 years later, in 1970, when he was addressing what was then University of Botswana and Swaziland, and I think still Lesotho. In 1970, he said, we must write our own history, because a nation without a history, without a past, is a lost nation.
Yeah, they quote that one.
That one.
Yeah, they quote that one a lot.
And that one, it's so much is contextualized by what was in that handbook 5 years earlier.
Yeah.
That Botswana history was not developed during the colonial era for obvious reasons. Colonialists never wanted indigenous history. So it was there in the form of oral traditions. It was there in some writings by Batswana. It was there in plays like Radatladi's Mutswasele.
But then,
And in the Maboka and likes, but it when the time came at independence for us to hopefully write our own history, something went wrong. Because when I look at other countries like Tanzania, Zambia, Kenya, in the immediate aftermath of Uhuru, independence, there was always in each of those places a big push to create a national history. And I don't think there's anything wrong with national history. You can have international history, you can have global history, but as a nation, you should have some sense of your identity. And so the analogy I like to use is, if you had amnesia, this thing where you might wake up and not know who you are, which does happen, unfortunately, to people, usually temporary. You really wouldn't know what to do if you don't know where you're coming from. If you've forgotten your past, you have no sense of who you are as a person. So I would say that the same thing is true about societies. They need to have some knowledge and shared understanding of their past to have their identity and even debate their identity. If you go to any other country, certainly the States, you know that people are going to be arguing back and forth about every detail of history.
Yeah.
What is the meaning of this and this? They argue, when did America start?
Yeah.
Was it 1619 with the slaves or 1776 with independence?
Yeah.
But having that debate really fuels society, and it grounds, I think, the politics, the culture, and everything else.
Yeah. So whose responsibility is it to at least have a common history that we can all relate with? You know, is who dropped the ball as far as maintaining that? Because I'm guessing, you know, the media plays its part by writing about it, but then who's then,
Yeah. Well, first
with
of all, let me
compiling
say, I think we need a common framework for history. We don't have to always agree. And certain people will say, oh, I want to know about my village more, or my Marafi or tribe or ethnic group. That's fine. We should create a framework which is very inclusive,
Yeah.
so that those different understandings and debates can happen. But if I was to blame, I would have to say the education system. They've had some Botswana history, but I don't think they've done a very good job of it. And they've also created their own myths. Some of these myths were in the oral culture during the colonial era. But the myth that protection came because the chiefs went to England and asked for it, for example. That was taught in primary school for a very long time. It may still be taught. I don't know.
Yeah. It's still the conversation. We still believe that there was a boat ride. People are still asking for pictures because I think there were photographs back then.
Yeah, but
We should have a picture.
I've put up photographs myself.
All right, so break it down because I think we have some time for it today. Did we have, a contingent go over to England?
We absolutely did, but first of all, the British imposed their protectorate on Botswana starting in January of 1885, having already talked about it with the Germans at the Berlin Conference, a side meeting, where the Germans were grabbing Namibia and the British were grabbing Botswana.
Yeah.
So it was imposed, and it was only on March 31st of 1885 that it was gazetted. And at that point, Batswana, because there was literate Batswana at the time, could read about it. And in May, General Warren came up and was basically announcing it, imposing it. So that's all in 1885. The Dikosi, specifically Batwain the First, Sibili the First, Kama the Third, they went to Britain in 1895.
That's 10 years later.
10 years and 6 months later. They left in August and came back in December. So, yes, they went to Britain. And yes, they accomplished something in Britain. It was a very important milestone, I would say, in the nation's history. But what they they had been invited to go there to celebrate the London Missionary Society, but that's not really the reason they went.
So it's not like they sat down and said, yo, guys, we got to go.
No, they did.
It was an invitation.
Well, no, they used that invitation. They did sit down and say, we got to go. But what did they want to go? They wanted to lobby against Cecil Rhodes.
Oh, okay.
Because at that point, Cecil Rhodes British South Africa Company had taken over Zimbabwe, Zambia. They were southern and northern Rhodesia.
Yeah.
And they had seen the way Rhodes operated. And particularly after 1893, they saw what his forces did to the Mandabili.
Yeah.
They saw the land grabbing. They knew Rhodes was trouble. It took a while for each of the three Dikosi to come on the same page. Initially, Batwain and Sibili were more cooperating against Rhodes, but Kama came on board, particularly from 1893.
Okay.
By 1895, the British were ready to hand Bechuanaland Protectorate over to the British South Africa Company. And at the same time, what was south of the Malopo River, then known as British Bechuanaland, it was a colony separate from the Protectorate, where the Baralang, Batlaro, Batlaping and the likes were. That was to be handed over to the Cape Colony. So the Dikosi wanted to go to Britain to lobby against the British South Africa Company and Rhodes. So then it was convenient for the London Missionary Society to be having its celebrations. So, yes, they got themselves invited to go there. That was their useful transit.
Yeah.
They also, though, had their own resources. They could pay for it. And so the three agreed. On their way down, they were at Mahikeng, and they talked to Mansiwa. And Mansiwa was too old to go, but he agreed that his son would go, Basele, who would become Kosi the following year. And with that, they went, and when I say they went, it wasn't just a Dikosi, but they had their secretaries.
Yeah.
There was Hohimang from the Kweneng, David Sebaneho from Kanye, Simon Siisa from Hamangwato, as it was then, from Palapi was then the capital.
Yeah.
And Baseli had Lefenya. Stephen Lefenya was the tribal secretary. Those guys knew English, so they were assisting the Dikosi. They also had Kwenesile Hasatsiwe, who's the brother of Batwain, also went. And they went also with one of the missionaries, Willoughby, who did a lot of organizing.
Okay.
And when they got to Britain, other missionaries and friends also were there to assist them.
Yeah.
So it was a well-orchestrated trip. Sometimes said they went to London. They went to all of Britain. They based themselves in London. And right from the beginning, they were there to meet the colonial secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, and lobby against the transfer of their territory to Rhodes. And Basile also wanted to lobby against the transfer of Baralong land south of the Malopo to the Cape Colony.
To the Cape Colony. So, what would have been the implications if, the Rhodes Company, the British South Africa Company, had taken control of, Botswana then?
Well, it could have been devastating. We would have been de facto ruled like Rhodesia. And
how horrible was he? Because we hear about what happened to the Ndebeles. Can you just give us an idea of who would have acquired us?
I must say, in 76, I passed through what was then still Rhodesia.
Yeah.
And even then, half of the land, and it was all the best land, was under, white minority farmer control.
Yeah.
So that alone, and of course, the indigenous majority were, who 95, 96, 97% of the population were second-class citizens or non-citizens in their own country.
So he was big on segregation.
Well, yeah. So, and this is something that was quite deep in the thinking of the Dikosi. Now, all in all, they would have been happy to have been able to rule on their own.
Yeah.
But they saw indirect rule by the British, imperial control from London, as much preferable to coming under a white minority regime, as they could see in South Africa, in Namibia, in then Rhodesia, Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So much of the history of Botswana is about staying out from white settler control. And even when Warren first came in April, May of 1885, the message by the Bakwena, and I believe from the Bangwato as well, although Kama did all the talking, but I think if you interpret Kama's words as well, but certainly from the Bakwena, because they had a big, long Kotla meeting, was very clear. We don't want to be put under any kind of rule like what was then in the Transvaal or the Cape Colony.
Yeah.
If we're going to accept protection at all, and we don't know why you're here having this protection, but if we're going to accept it, because we didn't ask for it, which the Bakwena made very clear, Sibili, Sechele, and the likes.
Yeah.
But if we're going to have it, because Sechele at least knew it was inevitable, it had already been done, fait accompli, so to speak. We don't want this protection to be anything like what we see across the border.
So they came at terms.
So, yes, and so what the Dikosi were trying to do in 1895 was 1895 was to protect the status quo. And they only half succeeded initially, because while they were away, Rhodes was taking over places.
Yeah.
And Basele left them in September. They stayed till the end of November. They only arrived back here in December, because the British accelerated the transfer of the lands to the Cape Colony and refused to see Basele. But the chiefs went all over Britain, giving speeches sometimes to crowds of as much as 3,000 people. And they also did something which is very contemporary. They spoke to the press constantly. And they even each got a book of press clippings. They had Durant's press clipping service take clippings of all of their press, all of their encounters, all of their mentions in the British press.
Was it because of this Willoughby fella?
I don't know who advised them, but they went to Durant's very early in their thing, and they all decided they would pay to have this service record all of their actions.
PR.
So it was, a PR.
Yeah.
2 of those books still exist.
That's amazing.
So if people are wondering, okay, how do we know? Well, there's plenty of photos of them in Britain.
Yeah.
I've put up some. But there's also 2 of the surviving books, Bat Twain's, which I think is at the museum. And right now, the Batswana one, I hope it'll go to the Batswana Museum, but it's right, and now I believe it's in Soroe. But I've held it as a huge book. It's this thick of press clippings of the Dikosi.
Yeah.
One time, the former President Kama, when he was still president, was actually, showing it and reading from it.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's always beats me why it seems so hard to get access to this history and why it's not so readily out there. Do you think how can we change that? Do you think it's young people's turn now to turn these things into documentaries?
Well, that's one thing. I was even being interviewed by a UB media person making a documentary, but I've been interviewed by quite a few over the years.
I can imagine.
But again, another thing that could help, besides putting the history in the schools, is, initially when BTV opened up, there was quite a lot of outreach for local dramas, but also local documentaries.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of historical series. There was some one-offs, and then there was a series that was called Ingwao something. And those were nice, they were, low budget, but still quite good.
Yeah.
And then BTV sort of faded out. Hopefully, BTV will come back and come back to these things as well as, podcasts and other movies. But if BTV was encouraging and becoming a more robust platform for local media production, particularly video media production, and it has done a lot in some areas, but it can do more.
I think the problem then becomes the interaction between the commissioning editors and the producers and the money. I think that's always what the argument becomes, and we miss out so much because of that argument. So I don't know how we're gonna get to that. I'm hoping in the future there will be a better way.
Well, I hope they will also do something. Now that I'm no longer in government, I can say certain things directly. But it's always been my view that, and it was even when I was, before I joined government, when I was in government, that BTV has to be a parastatal.
Yeah.
Not only to give it some autonomy from government. And if government needs BTV to be its mouthpiece to some extent, that can be arranged. There's different models for government to have its communications on the national broadcaster. But if BTV could operate as a public company, it would also be in a much better place to both join partnerships with other media to, for example, supposing some other media came in and they adopted a project, maybe a Pan-African project of some documentaries. And these documentaries could be produced, they could be put on BTV, but they could also end up in other markets. It would also allow BTV to have more flexibility in terms of recruiting local production and even buying out, overseas content. Right now, BTV operates as a government department. And that is not a way to run a broadcasting system. Government has its tender procedures and the likes, for better or worse. They're meant to make sure that there's appropriate things. But tender procedures of government do not fit a video media market whatsoever.
I'm going to throw that back to you, and also because, you're not there anymore. I'll talk to you as a former Deputy Permanent Secretary for media. How was it working in that space in that time? Why couldn't you guys put in some of those changes at that time?
Well, first of all, I was there for 15 years, so
very long time,
and 2 presidents, so things change from time to time.
It was enough time to change.
Yeah. And I mean, initially I was working for President Moai as his deputy senior private secretary and press secretary, but also de facto, as a speechwriter and things like that.
That was the first.
In fact, we were also a clerk to cabinet because the private office did many things, and I was in what was called the private office of the president.
All right.
So that was my first job for 5 years. And it was during that time that I did propose a government communication system. And had it the system was created. We managed to get it, but there was a lot of opposition to it. I don't know entirely why. But one of the issues was that people were used to having the Department of Information and Broadcasting simply being, there was assumption that's the information department.
Yeah.
And Department of Information Broadcasting had a dual purpose, which was always difficult for them to balance. They were supposed to be, for example, BTV and Radio Botswana, a public broadcaster and a government communication outlet. But at the same time, while that was happening, I could see and others could see that our communication as a government is not well coordinated. It's not keeping up with the times. And my focus wasn't just on the domestic. Of course, the politicians are most focused on the domestic, but also on the international situation. We had this situation where a little NGO called Survival International was causing all kind of ruckus, and we were not projecting on the international global scene. So we went through phases. When we first created the information system, I was hoping that this would radically transform the communications out of government, modernize it, and even give more space to BTV and to BOPA. But there was a lot of pushback.
What type of pushback? Like, was it politicians, or what was it? People didn't want people knowing exactly what was going on, because I think a lot of you started getting a reputation. I used to work on radio. You started getting a reputation as a bit of a spin doctor, because in the way that you were doing your work, you were really good at it, to a point where some people felt like, they were getting answers, but they were really not getting answers at the same time. And because the BTVs of this world were being used as propaganda machines, because they are national broadcasters, it became so difficult to know what really was happening. So I don't know if you can speak to that. People labeling you as the most amazing spin doctor we've ever had in government. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it was situational, at least. I'm not embarrassed about it, but, there was frustrations along the way. I must say, when I was working for Moai, I was enjoying every day, although it was always exhausting. But when we tried to create the government communication system, like I say, there was so much pushback. We would go, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, this and that. But it was clear that government at that time was not convinced to either ease up or rearrange. I could understand why they didn't want to give up BTV. But there were ways that we could have had, like I say, government communications and still have BTV operating as a public company, at least in my opinion. And we looked at models from Jamaica, Scandinavia, Britain. We did. There was plenty of benchmarks. But there was, I guess, an innate conservatism, both not just the political class, but probably as much or more the bureaucracy.
Okay.
And I would say that's a challenge to the new government. They have to balance between not upsetting the apple cart. They have to work within the public service they have. But if they're going to go in new directions, they have to exercise ultimately strong political leadership.
I feel that. So who was harder to work for? President Moai or President Khama?
I'm a bit reluctant, but I'll be honest.
We need some of that honesty. This is why I brought a lot
I like them both, but it was easier for me. But my job was different.
Okay.
My job under Moai was an exhausting pleasure.
Okay.
My job under Khama, to be fair, he always gave support, but I found, it was a lot of up and down. You were saying I was in the Ministry of Communications.
Yeah, they put it in communications.
I was only briefly seconded there.
Yeah.
And that was, I got Kama to send me there at one point because I knew that there was so much, between the communication system in the office of the president and media in the other ministry. I said, we have to put these together.
Yeah.
So I went there, but I was only there for 3 months.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and I was seconded. I was otherwise 15 years in the office of the president.
Yeah.
But then what happened is right after the election, they decided instead of me staying there, everybody should go back to the office of the president.
There were times where, our President Kama would put up statements or I don't know, people will call them directives, and then, the media presses come afterwards sometimes, or maybe he says something, and it always looked like you are always having to cover up for what has already been put out there. I don't know if that's how you felt, or maybe this is what's coming from the public, and what we were reading from it is that the president will go before, briefing you guys about what he's going to talk about.
Well, yes, the coordination that we would have liked to have had didn't come together. I don't necessarily blame Kama. Of course, Kama was his own person, and he had his own views about how he interacted with the press, which didn't always make the private media happy.
Yeah.
But I think there was I had just as much of a problem getting with other ministries. The idea of a communication system is that all ministries should be in the same page.
Okay.
In as much as, the way our government works is cabinet ministers have, shared responsibility, which should mean shared communication. So when they're in cabinet, they can argue up, down, in, and out. But once a decision is made, and that's what a presidential directive is, by the way.
Yeah.
There's no action outside of presidential directives. And all a presidential directive is the summation, which is the president calls the shots ultimately, but it's usually by consensus.
Yeah.
But the president, once the cabinet has reached its consensus and the president said, yes, this is what I think we have, that is what goes into a presidential directive. So all cabinet ministers, when they go to parliament, to the public, should be on the same page.
Yeah.
So if that's true, the idea is that all ministries should be on the same page with their other communications. Yeah. So the initial idea is that every ministry must have a media office, which most of them didn't have. So over time, we were able to build that in.
It's now an everyday, like most of them have an office now.
They do.
Yeah.
It wasn't complete frustration.
Yeah.
We made progress. Like I say, maybe it was 2 forward, 1 back, but progress was made. But it was very difficult. Once they had offices, trying to then get them to coordinate, trying to make sure the ministers were. Sometimes the ministers weren't talking to their communications people very much. Yeah. And later on, and that's why, there was a lot of back and forth about this. I think ultimately there is a communication system now that can be further refined by the government. But it took a while.
Yeah, I know. At least we get some word. I've always wondered about like our foreign foreign affairs policy. I don't know what you call it. How we relate with other countries outside, and big ones like the United States, the Russias of this world. Just recently, I think one of the MPs. No, I think was it the vice president was in a meeting with some representatives. I don't know if it was from Russia or Ukraine, and there was also a meeting between, I think, Dr. Kama and, I don't know if it was, some representatives from Russia or Ukraine also. I don't know. And then with Botswana, we never really had a foreign streamlined voice when it comes to what we stand for.
Yeah, well,
when it comes to matters outside of Botswana. So I've always wondered, you haven't worked in that space. Do we have a voice now, or are we still playing the same role we're playing in the 80s? We
do have a voice. It got bigger under Mohai because he was quite.
Yeah, he was blunt with it.
He was quite strategic in his international outreach. And then it was. Well, first, I think most of the time the government's been on the same page, but sometimes ministers will go off on an international topic. It has happened before. We've sat down and said, "What is the message?"
Yeah.
That has happened. But then again, when we talk about somebody like the former president, I think it's a different thing. Recently there was this thing where the government was having its meetings with the Russians, and he had a meeting with the Ukrainian ambassador.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm not sure there was a contradiction because we do have relations with both. But to the degree that there might have been a contradiction, the former president is not the political position of the government of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, he went off to see the Dalai Lama. That, to my mind, was kind of neither here nor there. It was upsetting to the government of the day, but really the government of the People's Republic of China, which I'm sure was not pleased, nonetheless knew that he's not going under the auspices of the government of the day. He's not representing Botswana. He's representing himself. He is no longer president.
Yeah, but the optics, him being a former president, I think maybe that's what the argument from the former as well, the former government.
Well, but I think that's, for example, Nelson Mandela also met with the Dalai Lama after he was president, when he had stepped down. So I think you've got to give leeway to former presidents.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I agree one way or the other with who so-and-so meets, but a retired president is no longer the government unless he's specifically going on behalf of the government. So, this is not only true of our country or South Africa. I've used the Mandela example. But, for example, Jimmy Carter, the American president who died just recently, a couple months ago, once he left the presidency, he was all over the place.
Yeah, he was everywhere.
He was talking to Hamas and all kind of people, Hezbollah. That was not the U.S. government, at least not officially. Maybe they used him as a backdoor once in a while.
Yeah.
He went to North Korea. Yeah. But that's something that's not unusual in the world. Former presidents are not presidents.
Yeah. No, I feel that completely. So right now, though, how do you perceive the current state of media freedom in Botswana? Especially because the Media Practitioners Act of 2008 has always been a topic of debate. And, just talk a little bit about journalistic freedom and the quality of information dissemination in Botswana.
It could all be improved. I understand the arguments against the Media Practitioners Act, but for the most part...
What are the arguments? Because I really don't get them.
Well, yeah, because for one thing, it was never really implemented.
Yeah.
So had it been implemented, there might have been an issue.
Yeah.
What I've seen over the years, in the 90s, I was with MISA and other media groups. I was actually the acting chairman of MISA when we went against what would have been a much more draconian Media Practitioners Act that was proposed by Kedikiwe at the time. And we pushed back, and Kedikiwe met with us. And what they said is, okay, our urgency is broadcasting. Yeah. So we negotiated a Broadcasting Act quite successfully with government. And it was later replaced. Since then, both on the private sector side and with government, I've seen, from time to time, the Media Consultative Council has been up as part of the HLCC process. Mm-hmm. I've seen progress, but I've also seen a lot of situations where one or both parties, walks away from what could have been win-win situations.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you've got a new government. I saw that the Minister of State Presidency was meeting with the media, reviving an institution which I'm aware of because I was part of that once upon a time ago. So there is opportunity, but I don't think it's the salient issue right now. The challenges facing media, one of the things they were upset about is the perception of government not advertising in media during the comma years. Yeah. And there was truth to that.
I think we're back to that now.
Yeah, but also, at the time, government was basically subsidizing the media. Some of that advertising was just didn't make sense, to be honest, from a purely economic sense. Yeah. Full double-page spreads of a ministry donating some money, and they're paying more for the double-page spread. But the main thing is the real challenge, which I was telling talking to them is, first of all, we had proposals try to increase and enforce private sector media content within the media. That is, advertising was coming from South Africa and dominating the market. That should and can still be changed.
Yeah.
There are things that can be done. The other challenge that was facing the media was universal. What we're here on a podcast.
Yeah.
It's the social media, the internet, and the likes that was the real enemy at the time. And as I developed the BW government page, and we branched out into other social media, all of a sudden we were bigger than them.
Yeah.
I mean, and with hardly using any money. Initially it was just, I had a group of like 3 other people working with me, and we were finding our way for the BW government. But our initial approach, which is no longer the approach, was to basically bombard information and use it as a platform not only for government communication, but for anything about Botswana. Because de facto, we were selling tourism in the country, we were covering sports and doing all sorts of things because we went to a quantitative approach. So we were one of the 5 most active government social medias in the world.
It's big right now. Even right now, BW government, like, it's really reliable right now.
And so I'm proud of that.
Worked,
See, when I talked about it, modern communications from government, that's part of what you need to do.
We're still checking it out to this day. So do you think the media landscape in Botswana adequately represents and, preserves local history and culture? I mean, we were talking about that earlier. Like, whose responsibility is it to keep at least, if we're talking about one thing, we know what we're talking about, and we're arguing about something that is part of our history from back there, and we can all agree that this happened, instead of everyone picking out my history from this book or that book, at least have a common history that we can all talk about. So do you think that, our media in Botswana adequately represents and preserves that?
I think the print media has done well. I can't complain because, I've produced things for a long time in Mehi, in the daily news, but also for the Gazette, which is still around but now no longer in print, Sunday Standard, Monitors. So I've been all over the place, and I see it's not just me, others. There's been a lot of debate about heritage and history in the private media. What we were talking about, I think, yes, BTV could do more. And I think it's vital that it really should, and so I hope that the government of the day, the new government, will become a bit creative about that. And like I say, for example, we went to Jamaica, and I found that Jamaica, a country that's a middle-income country like us, didn't have big budgets. It's a struggling country in many ways. But they had a very effective, at least at the time, I assume it might still be good, but at the time, a very effective government communication system that was also a national communication system. So from the government perspective at that time, it would not necessarily be the right formula now. The government would put on something called Jamaica Today for 1 hour every night. And they would use that to promote the government agenda. And then otherwise, the Jamaican broadcasting system, which did operate as a corporate, was very free to, promote all kinds of other things. And it was a very dynamic station. When we talk about promotion of reggae and the likes, the Jamaican Broadcasting Corporation, pulled its weight and helped project Jamaica to the world. And I
know guys who had VHSs that had the Jamaican JBC or something on the top there, and there was a lot of Jamaican music.
And the thing is, when I went to Kingston to look at that, and then later another delegation was sent down there from Information Broadcasting and some of my juniors when we already had the government communication, we could see that Jamaica actually had less seeming money. I don't know. Their facilities were more modest than us. But they were doing more with less.
No, I don't know what's wrong with us though. It seems like we have all of these big budgets, but then nothing really, there's no continuation. It's like everyone is always replacing the last one, and then when they come in, it's like, all right, screw whatever that guy was doing, I'm going to do something new. But I'm not saying this is what's going on right now with the new government, but I'm hoping there's lessons that can be learned from what others got wrong. Thank you so much for locking into PODI-CAST with Scar today. Now, if you are looking for a housekeeper, a gardener, a plumber, a maintenance worker, a babysitter, a personal trainer, a carpenter, or anything, I got the hookup for you. It's called Skillshare Service dash Danky on Facebook. It will connect you to that website where you are able to connect with a service provider of your choice. Make sure that you go on there and you are able to hook yourself up, man, and sign up. The FB page has all of the directions. The FB page is www.facebook.com/Skillshare Service Danky / and yeah, you can get hooked up, man. Baby, let's get back to the show, guys. I want to ask you about your opinion about what you've seen in the first 100 days for the new government. What do you think they're getting right as far as they're communicating?
Well, I'm optimistic cautiously. Yeah. I think it's such a big transition that it would have been a mistake for them to try to overturn everything.
Yeah,
it could have been very destabilizing overnight.
Yeah,
yet to me they're mostly saying the right things. I was happy to see a transition myself. To be honest, there's a soft spot in my heart for the BDP. One of my heroes of all time is the late Sir Ketamili Masiri.
Yeah.
But I've never been a member of a political party.
Yeah.
And in 2019 and the last election, I did in fact vote for the opposition because I thought it was a time for change.
Yeah. What was it for you, before we go any further? What was it for you that made you go, no, I'm going to go register to vote and I'm going to go and vote that way?
Well, I've always, since I became a citizen, I've always voted.
Yeah.
I've always registered.
Yeah.
But I like I say, there's a soft spot in my heart for the BDP when I think of the legacy of the party. And under differing circumstances, I might have joined the party once I retired. As a public service, I saw no reason to be in a political party because we are supposed, even when if you want to call it that, spin doctors for the presidency, we still have to do it within the parameters of a nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So I could defend the government position, but I would not attack the opposition. Sometimes the newspapers would try to create like I did.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. They came to me, one of our prominent media houses, and they wanted the government position on the CKGR. So I gave them the position.
Yeah.
Then they go to the current president, who was then just an activist for Batswana.
Yeah.
And of course, he has completely different. He was a lawyer in the case.
Yeah.
Then it's like, Ramsay attacks Boko.
Oh.
And I never mentioned Boko. I was just defending the government position.
Yeah.
But they create those situations sometimes.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. If they will gradually start, they're saying the right things. If they can implement, I hope they will look into the media landscape a bit, particularly with broadcasting and make sure that we do have an effective reboot. I think in the last few years, our international profile has declined somewhat. And yet we have to play in the global community. We were very prominent, sometimes for not the best things like HIV/AIDS, but also for good things, good governance, tourism, and the like. So we were very prominent in the world in the beginning of this century under Mohai, and we need to keep that profile high.
Yeah.
And because we are a small country, so the more we can project ourselves, the better.
Yeah. Right now, do you think it's, because the elections, before the elections, it looked like it was all doom and gloom. It felt like we were at our lowest. Where do you think we are right now in comparison to all the other times that, as a historian as well, where do you think Botswana is right now as compared to all the other years? Are we great?
Well, maybe it's the cliche of the best of times and the worst of times.
I think maybe we can put even a measure. At 10 being, when did we have the most diamonds?
Well, look.
Where are we now? Like as far as on 1 being really, really in a bad state and 10 being, magnificent.
Well, where I think we are good, first of all, the fact that our democracy was shown to work.
Yeah.
Some people are like, maybe the elections are rigged or this or that.
Yeah.
But we all 70% of us were of the mind to change in the last election. And so that happened. I must say I was surprised because I was used to the opposition's divided.
Yeah.
And so the BDP will win.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it happened in 2019, it'll just happen again.
Yeah.
They might go down. And then some people said, well, maybe they'll go down so much that there'll need to be a coalition. And I was like, I thought that was optimistic, but maybe plausible.
Yeah.
So, of course, I was as shocked as most people.
Yeah, that was shocking as hell.
But be that as it may, it does give us a time for reset. But what's very much off now is we've got a new government. Hopefully they will do the right thing. But to be fair to them, our coffers are reduced. One of the reasons why I did think there was time for a change was the seeing how money was being burned by government. You know, seeing our foreign reserves decline. You know, following those issues. In the past, the BDP had been the party of fiscal responsibility, of clear planning and the likes. Yeah. And I thought it had lost direction there.
Yeah.
And so, when right before the election, you know, there was this thing which came out from Econosort, from Keith Jeffries. Yeah. And it was just a paragraph talking about how, and I think most people, many of the people who will be watching this will know what I'm talking about. Yeah. You know, showing how the foreign reserves have been reduced dramatically in the last year plus.
And that happened right before the elections. That episode came out and freaked out so many people. Me too. I was like, oh no.
Yeah. And then the government first tries to sort of deny it. Then they had the Minister of Finance and Development Planning give a 7-page speech in Parliament. And when you read through it, she's saying from the beginning to the end the same thing that Keith Jeffries had put in the paragraph.
Yeah,
which is not surprising because where did Keith Jeffries get his information?
Yeah.
From government. Yeah. He was just looking at the government sources. Yeah. And to be fair to our government, it's good that we still have a government that does, you know, report these figures properly and appropriately. Yeah. But that's a big challenge. COVID was a huge, and that I can't blame any government for. I think we did the best we could with that. But between COVID, the decline of diamonds, which is going to be a challenge, not just because the diamonds maybe come less, but also the real thing is killing us right now. Well, I think there's two things. The demand for diamonds is shaky. There's so many other luxury goods. And so you need a lot of marketing and a lot of spin to keep those diamonds are forever message going. But the second thing is, unfortunately, and this doesn't surprise me at all, the so-called synthetic, the lab-grown diamonds, they're not really synthetic, they're real diamonds. That is gaining market share.
And don't they turn yellow or something?
No, they don't. The biggest problem with them is they can be too perfect, so they even put imperfections, but they're pure, real diamonds. Now, as a historian, I'm not shocked by this because the same thing happened to pearls before I was born.
Yeah.
When you read old books, pearls are so valuable, and and the black pearl is going to be such a valuable, special thing.
Yeah.
But then cultured pearls came into the market, I think, before World War II, and pearls just have never been the same again.
Yeah. So this could happen to diamonds.
It could. We should be prepared for it.
All right. So I'm gonna go this way, and then I'll come back.
And by the way, if there's any foreign people. You don't have to, you can just, if I could cut that out from our international audience.
No,
diamonds are forever, people.
Diamonds are forever, guys.
Get the real things.
I want to talk about a little about you and education. Not a lot of people come from serving presidents and going back to being an educator. You started off where as an educator? At Lahai Academy, or were you?
Well, I'd been a teaching fellow at Harvard in Boston.
Yeah.
But then I was at Tenoto College of Education, but I was having issues there. And so Ma Hamilton, who was about to start Lahai Academy, gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I went to Lahai Academy initially as part of the admin team and looking at curriculum and the likes, as well as teaching social sciences.
Okay.
But then I became the principal of Lahai Academy.
Did you know how famous you were? Did you know how famous you were? I went to Masalapula right next door. Yeah, you were pretty famous. Like, I don't know if you were strict or what, but everyone, some of us even knew you and we didn't even go there to Lagae. So what is your style? I mean, how do you...
Well, I don't think
is one of the greatest schools like we've had in Botswana for as far as results and the quality of students that come out of there.
Yeah, well...
What is your style as far as...
At that time, I was perceived to be a disciplinarian when I became principal. But that, again, I would say is situational. Discipline had broken down in the school.
Yeah.
And it was threatening. The school had gotten off to a good start, but it was under threat.
Yeah.
If we didn't get the discipline back on track. And
Phase 2.
And so when I started, in the first year or two, I really had to hammer.
Yeah.
And so I introduced detention.
Oh, my word.
Which is something I knew from my own school backgrounds.
What were some of the things that you had them do?
Well, we could get, the one that was obvious.
We were getting beaten next door, so it can't be worse.
We didn't beat anybody. I never have beaten anybody.
No, we were getting walloped next door, like right across the bridge there, Masalapula. It was a mess.
Yeah, but I never walloped anybody. And I've discovered a lot of people hated detention more than even the thought of walloping, because you bang, bang, and then you're done.
That was easy.
But so an obvious one, if you painted graffiti in the school, you were going to paint the thing over. Yeah. So sometimes we had physical stuff. But the main thing was the time. If I have you on detention on a Friday afternoon, much worse on a Saturday, that bit. But that's what I knew from, my own high school. We had detention. Yeah. And I never wanted to be detained. Yeah. I once was, but,
That's really, really awesome. I had another question here about you being an educator. What historical topics do you students usually find most intriguing or challenging?
Well, unfortunately, we don't do Botswana history, or even much Southern African history. Okay. So right now, currently, with the Cambridge curriculum that we're using, we get some African history in A levels. But I do think that students do have a natural hunger for history that's more Afrocentric. Yeah. And so that's a challenge. Certainly when I was teaching history at the Cambridge O level, we had some Southern African history, and I was able to sort of import some local history into it. Yeah. I was, briefly at Molifi, and the children liked that. Yeah. Or if I remember when we did the movie, showed the movie Zulu Dawn. Zulu Dawn, the Zulu, beat up the British thoroughly. It's about the Battle of the Sandwana. Okay. They love that.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah, so local content will also get students more interested in history. Yeah. I mean, I try to get them interested in Germany and Soviet Union, Cold War, all of that, and there's some interest in it. Yeah. But certainly, I wish we could make it Afrocentric. Even if we were to do, say, World War II, why aren't we talking about Batswana in the middle of World War II, or Africa in the middle of World War I? Yeah. I mean, there was battles fought in and around Botswana in World War I. Yeah. So,
and there are some people who actually went for there were some troops that were sent from Botswana that went up there. That's always something that I've always found intriguing. It's like, how were they picked? How did they go there? And how there's so much that I think is missing.
In World War I, Batswana fought in Namibia, which was German territory conquered. In East Africa, Tanganyika was under German control. That campaign lasted. The last German army to surrendered in Zambia. Okay. 2 weeks after the armistice. But 555 Batswana were taken to the Western Front, including Sibili II, the future Kosi Sibili II of Bakwena, and others. World War II was even bigger because over 10,000 Batswana were in the African Pioneer Corps. And about half of them were involved in the campaign in Italy. Okay. And those
so someone to Italy, even as far as Italy, coming out through Algeria.
Well, what happened is in 1940, end of 1942, Batswana, who had been already in the army in what was then the Ninth Army, which was there to stop the Germans who never came to Syria and Iraq, were transferred to Egypt to the British Eighth Army that was fighting the Italians and the German Africa Corps. Okay. That was a hot thing. And those units were trained in combat roles, most particularly gunners and artillery. So there was 3.5 heavy anti-aircraft guns was the one that was most common for them, though at times they used other artillery. Yeah. So they were trained in anti-aircraft. Initially it was an experiment.
But you're just down here, shooting from down here, and guys have a plane and they're dropping bombs.
Yeah, they had special crash courses in mathematics.
But they're still in the open.
Yeah, they had special crash courses in mathematics for these guys. But they discovered that Batswana and Basotho were very good, maybe because many of them had been into the mines and were used to working as teams under instruction. So the British were actually surprised. Some of them, it was an experiment, but at the end of the experiment, they decided that Batswana could run these things by themselves. They didn't need like a white officer, manning the guns with them. And we got to Syracuse, and the Battle of Syracuse, when the invasion of Sicily, that's when they really came in their own. About half of the Axis Italian and German airplanes shot over Syracuse were by Batswana gunners.
Guys, come on now. Yeah.
So if you go to the Imperial War Museum in London, there's a painting of Batswana gunners after the battle, cleaning their guns.
I only knew about Sibylla's gun. I didn't know we went all the way to Italy to shoot.
And then an even bigger thing, if I was rich like Elon Musk, I'd want to make a Hollywood World War II film. Yeah. But my World War II film would be about the Battle of Salerno. The Battle of Salerno happened in October of 1943. Yeah. The Americans' Fifth Army was landing in Italy. Yeah. They were supposed to outflank the Germans and seize Rome. But they got on the beach, and the Germans were in the hills already and had them pinned down. Yeah. And at one point, the German panzers, the new Tiger tanks and the likes, were almost at the point that they could have pushed the American army off. But this American army was not just American. There was, among other things, the British 10th Corps, which included lots of Batswana and Basotho and even some Swati gunners. Yeah. And they and other, what we would now call Commonwealth forces, formed an artillery line that, and in the case of the HAA, the anti-aircraft guns, it had already been discovered if you lowered their battles, they were powerful anti-tank weapons.
Yeah, they faced them head on.
Yeah, so they were just busting up those German Tiger tanks. And that gun line was what protected the Fifth Army from disaster.
Jeez.
At Salerno. So that would be what I would want to make as a World War II movie.
Guys.
Showing Africans saving the American army at Salerno.
That's amazing. I really, we could do this all day. My lady knows, I'm all about history, especially with the world wars, because now I'm trying to figure out why Hitler wanted Africa now. He was really going for world domination.
Yeah. Well, he had a soft spot for the Boers or the Afrikaners.
Also, he was going for the Afrikaners.
He had he grew up supporting the Boers. During the Boer War, when he was a little child, he was fascinated by the Boers.
But now what do you think about this connection between what they say about Elon Musk and, he put up the Hitler? Do you think is...
First of all, I don't think he did a Hitler salute.
He did it twice.
But other people, just when putting your hand up like this.
Twice. He did it twice.
I don't think I have reservations about Mr. Musk. I don't think and he may have some bad ideas about South Africa for all I know. But I don't think he's a Nazi. Yeah. To be honest. Yeah. So otherwise, hopefully things will work out internationally between the South Africans and the new government in America.
I want to ask about, Botswana's journey from pre-colonial times to independence. What pivotal moments do you believe have significantly shaped the country's identity as we see it now?
Well, maybe I could even start earlier, but I'll start in 1852-53, the Batswana Boer War. Yeah. The Boers from the Transvaal, André Pretorius' Boers, invaded Botswana to subjugate Batswana. And Sechele brought together Bakatla Bahamanana, Baka, Bangweketsi. They made their stand at Dimawe. They fought to a standstill. They took a lot of casualties.
Was it really one gun?
One gun.
This is Sechele's gun. Is not where that happened?
Well, the main thing that made the whole story of this war different was, unlike some of the people that, like, for example, the Zulu, who had fought the same Andres Pretorius, they had used their Iron Age tactics and their assegai, their shields and the likes, against the Boers, who, of course, had guns.
Had guns, yeah.
At Dimawe, at Kwakwe, where there was a skirmish, and as the Batswana raided into the Transvaal, it was guns against guns. So that's the great equalizer.
Okay.
So now, among the guns that they had at Dimawe, yes, Sechele had his cannon.
Yeah.
And that cannon can be seen at Mahikeng Museum. But Sechele also had some very sophisticated rifles, because they were used to shoot elephants. So they had a much higher range, much bigger bullets.
Yeah.
So they were like little cannons. The Boers themselves at Dimawe brought a lot of artillery because they knew they were up against something.
But who armed Sechele and his troops at that time?
Well, he was buying, guns were being smuggled by all kind of traders.
Oh, there were smugglers as well.
Well, we say smugglers. Initially, they weren't even smugglers, but the British and the Boers signed something called Sand River Convention to try to outlaw the sale of guns to black people.
Yeah.
And so at that point, they were technically smugglers. But among others, David Livingston and Robert Moffat.
You got to make some money somehow.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in
the
the case of those two, I don't think it was for profit.
Yeah.
Both of them were fiercely anti-slavery.
Robert Moffat is the one who translated
the Bible.
The
He was the father-in-law to Livingston.
Okay.
But he also knew a lot about guns. He had friends in the Birmingham Gun Quarter in Britain where customized guns were produced. Guns at that time were kind of cottage industry, so you could easily have guns that were more sophisticated than what was in the army for hunting.
Awesome.
So to shoot an elephant, I mean, the Brown Bess musket, which was a standard issue of the British Army until the mid-1850s, was only accurate for about 60 yards, 100 yards max.
Yeah.
But a rifle, that is a rifled barrel, with a cylindro-conical bullet, which were being produced and which Sechele was buying, that could fire 1,000 yards. And if it was 8-bore or 4-bore, really big ones, they could put down an elephant or a rhinoceros. You don't want to go up to an elephant. If you shoot it with a musket, it's just going to bounce off the elephant and he's going to trample you to death.
Yeah.
So these guns were useful for hunting. The way Sechele and the other Dikosi did it is they traded ivory for guns. And so by the time the Boers attacked in 1852, there was guns on guns. And so that, in the wake of the initial battles, you have the Baleti, Baharutsi, Batlokwa, other Marafe coming into Botswana. And so when we look at the demography and, the different villages, almost all of them are products of that war. And the boundary we have with South Africa at Limpopo, Notwani, around Lobatse, Pioneer Gate, that boundary hasn't really changed since the aftermath of the war. It was demarcated later, but you look at old maps from the 1860s, it's the same boundary.
So that's a significant war.
So that's a milestone, And because, Batswana, one of the missionaries, I think, was very apt when he compared Batswana to the ancient Greeks. Ancient Greeks were disunited. They had different city-states. They warred against each other. But when an outside power like the Persians came, they would unite up and defend themselves. And that's the way the Batswana were when the Amandabele came or the Boers came. They united and made a strong stand. And because they had people like Sechele and Sekoma, and Sentufe and then Hasatsiwe, these Dikosi were, getting guns. They were ready. So that's a milestone, and it's at least a pre-national thing. So when you look at maps before the Protectorate, maps like Holub's map from the 1870s, you see these Batswana kingdoms also marked in the same coloration to indicate that they were kind of an alliance. There's a different. They're in Holub's map. They're all in green, and they're all in the German map. It's called like Sechele's Reich, Kama's Reich, which is a very strong word in German.
Those are very big words.
And in English, there's an English version of the same map. It's Kama's kingdom, Sechele's kingdom, Hasatsiwe's kingdom. So you look at that map, you can see the nascent nation, the nation to be already existing.
Taking shape.
Then, of course, the Protectorate is a milestone, but the chiefs going to Britain tended to, define the Protectorate by keeping it out of Rhodesia.
Yeah.
A second big campaign was staying out of South Africa, and there was an initial campaign from 1908 to 1910 to stay out of the Union, which succeeded, but it was temporary because in the Constitution, the Union of South Africa Act, which was in essence the Constitution of South Africa, there was a schedule for the eventual incorporation of Botswana land, Basotho land as it was called, and Swaziland.
Yeah.
And so throughout the colonial period, when you look at Sekedi and others, the work they did, a lot of it was to protect the country, stay out of South Africa.
Yeah.
So that's a long struggle during the colonial era. There were other milestones.
Yeah.
One of the worst, milestones was the Rinderpest.
Okay.
Like right after the Dikosi came back and saved the country, so to speak, they initially had only come with a half a loaf, as it was called, but then became a whole loaf, a full victory when Rhodes, actor Jameson, invaded and failed in his invasion in the Transvaal, and at that point the British withdrew British South Africa Company political administration from Bechuanaland. Under international and domestic outcry.
Awesome.
But right after that, one of the worst things that ever happened in our history was a combination of disease and, the worst of all, the Rinderpest. There was drought, there was locusts, there was various viruses going around, the Russian flu. But the Rinderpest came through all of southern and eastern Africa. It was devastating right down the continent, but it knocked out 90% of all the cattle.
Jeez.
And not only that, it also knocked out small stock, and all hoofed wildlife were also affected.
That's why we don't want any foot in mouth.
No.
We'll fight anything that comes through our borders.
It was absolutely devastating, and it pushed for the first time Batswana in mass into labor migration, which became...
Or to go to the mines and stuff.
Yeah. There was nothing. There was starvation otherwise. And particularly after they'd finished building the railway. And so then the British introduced hut tax, and that was linked to labor recruitment for the mines. So that's a very important milestone as well.
One,
because up until a few years after independence, I mean, I witnessed, even in 1984 when I was at Christmas in Mashupa, there were still buses coming from Tabela taking miners back to Gauteng.
Jesus. So this thing was not only just a joke, because people like making a joke about that. Your dad used to work at the mines, but like it was a real thing even 40 years ago. Like this was a real
We were
thing.
a migrant labor. That's what the British saw as Botswana's role in the regional economy.
I've always wanted to ask about the discovery of diamonds, because like I always wonder, was it that much of a shock? Like did we just run into them? How come no one, like, even the British, they left before we discovered the diamonds?
Not really. But it was well timed. But the prospecting for diamonds began in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And there was a couple people, one was named Dutoit, who had theories about where the diamonds might be. But then World War II got in the way. After the war, there was renewed interest by De Beers, but it was a very slow process. They did discover some diamonds here and there, but they hadn't found the kimberlite, although there was a theory about where it might be.
The kimberlite is a rock that...
Yeah, I mean, until it's called kimberlite because it's the first one was the Kimberley and De Beers mines. Because before that, diamonds were found just by, on the rivers and the likes, and that's what made them very rare and very expensive. But in kimberlite, you could dig and sift through the rubble and find the raw stones, which could then be cut and polished.
Yeah.
So by the early 60s, there was some confidence in some quarters. But it is also true that the final breakthrough in terms of finding the Boteti diamonds that they were moving in that direction. But in 1965, that's when it was confirmed. Now, it was announced fully in 1967.
It's too much of a coincidence, Dr. Ramsay.
So
we get independence right here. Why I always as the conspiracy theorist in me, feels like this was a trade-off. And like, all right, cool, we'll give you your independence, and then you work with this company here, which is I don't know, because even the deal itself.
I think I would flip it the other way around.
Yeah,
I think Seretse Khama had more confidence in leading Botswana to independence in 1966.
Blind faith.
In the middle of a drought, when Botswana we were one of the 5 least developed countries in the world. We only had 4 or 6 or 10 kilometers, or all those statistics that we know about.
Yeah.
I suspect that he had more confidence because Harry Oppenheimer had whispered in his ears, it's looking promising in Botete.
Yeah. Okay, I can work with
that's
that.
Just that's
I can work with that.
That's a perception, though. That's not an absolute fact, but it is true that the whisper did occur.
So he had confidence like that because,
I'm not sure. I wasn't in the room as to what Seretse's reaction, but he had information.
Yeah, it wasn't just blind faith. But we do believe in the Lord, so, it's... And I wanted to ask also about your fascination with the research of the Batswana dynasty. When did that start? And, are we going to see books? Are we going to see a documentary?
Yeah, we have some writings. Right now I'm working on Sechele bio, but I keep getting distracted by other things.
What things? Other work?
Livingston Kolobeng... vocational responsibilities, but also right now we're finishing the 6th edition of Historical Dictionary of Botswana, and some people want me to write a paper about, which I think I'll do, contextualizing the recent election, because there's a publication coming out on that. Yeah. But I've done a chapter and I've got other drafts. I want to get Sechele out of the way, and. But otherwise, much of the raw material on that is in my thesis, which I've put up, as PDF now. Right. I've got this site called Academia Edu UB, and I've got 75 publications on it.
Whoa.
Including 15 books. So people can go there. It's all free. It's PDF.
Say that again. How do we get in touch with it?
Well, you just type my name in academia.edu, maybe at UB. There is another one that's a ghost site, but the real one should show up. It's got my face and colorized. So
we'll definitely check it out.
I've got 75 publications on that now, and I keep adding to it. It's including scanned copies of my older books that were out of print, like Birth of Botswana and Building a Nation, and articles, including what I've also been doing is taking some of these series I used to write for Mechi or Daily News or Mantra, whatever, put them together, give them footnotes, annotations, so people know I'm not just making it up.
Yeah.
And I put them up, and I'd rather put them up on that site rather than submit them to a journal, because I put it in a journal, then it's restricted.
Yeah.
But when I upload them myself, anybody can see them and download them. So I put them up, I turn them to PDF, and put them on the site. We
would love to see them. Guys, make sure, just type in Dr. Jeff Ramsay, and you should see as much stuff as possible popping up. There's a question that, I think the guys also want to hear. In order of top 5, who are your top 5 favorite presidents to come out of BW? I think I have to. I'm a rapper. We
first
believe
of all,
in top 5s. But in order of appearance, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're not saying 5 is bad. He's just at the bottom of the list.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give a slight edge to Masiri as number 1.
Oh, you want to start from the top?
Yeah.
All right. Give it up.
Or I should
KJ.
But to be honest, Masiri could not have done it without Seretse.
Yeah.
I don't know if but maybe they can be co-1.
Okay.
I think Mohai deserves a lot of credit, at least for putting our country on a higher level of international profile, and getting us through HIV/AIDS.
Yeah.
If nothing else, but I
don't think people, even the younger ones, really understand that time in Botswana's history. we were well known. Even when I had an opportunity to travel the continent to do like some programs and some shows, and even in 2007, people still thought of Botswana like that, like the country with HIV/AIDS, and that used to really, really irritate me because I didn't know if people back home knew that is our calling card. That's what people know us for.
Yeah, it was very much of a double-edged sword because we had to go out and make an international appeal, but that also did put us on the front line.
In the front, yeah.
So I remember when we went to India, we had the Indian media there, and they asked Mohai, so what is it like to be, the president of the country that's best known for, on the one hand, HIV/AIDS, and on the other hand, was Mauro Mutswa.
Oh, God.
The Ladies Detective Agency.
What a question.
That was just as big. I remember when I went on the subway in London at one point, and I see no newspapers anymore because newspapers were dying already.
Yeah.
But people reading Ladies Detective Agency.
Yeah, it's a big deal, that thing.
It was a big deal.
So he did a really amazing job. So that's why he's at your number 3.
I really had a good time, although it was exhausting working for Mohai.
Yeah. Was it the wine?
Well, we did wine.
Cheers, big old man.
And we had some very good wine at times.
Yes, sir.
And, time was sometimes relative. I remember one time I'd been up all night.
Yeah.
And, because we had to add a new speech because we had an event added on. And we were, at that point, in a tour in the U.S. We had to address some group in New York.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, maybe you need this for breakfast.
Oh, my word. I don't party with my boss.
No.
It's always a trap. You walk in there.
Maybe I should have kept that a secret, but no, that wasn't, and it wasn't normal. We usually were, after 6.
After 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
The best time. Number 4, I think. Okay, you put joint at number 1 there. And then
so then I guess Mohai can be number 3. Mm-hmm. So we've got what? Then we've got Kama.
Okay.
I think I think he's a man of integrity. A lot of people say other things about him, but I've known him for a long time, and I think he has many good qualities. His presidency had its ups and its downs, but I think there was perhaps more ups than people. When he became president, we had an economic crisis, and I think that was well handled.
Yeah.
Maybe other things like our outreach to the press could have been better.
I really want to ask about that because he's really eloquent in how he speaks. So it's never been about him being able to express himself?
No.
What was it?
I just don't know. Because at the time, it's like the few times he would go out, he would do marvelously.
Really, really well.
And you see, since he's left the presidency, he has no hesitation.
No, he's telling it all.
I honestly wish he had done more of that when he was president.
But you guys never tapped into that or asked him, you can really explain this better than an intern or an officer can.
Yeah, we did our best.
Yeah.
But that was that, even when we had the strike, the president needed to address it. He did
mother
finally.
of all strikes.
But by the time he addressed it, it was already late into the strike. And he gave a rather brilliant, in my view, presentation on it at the high-level consultative council. So it was the private sector there, the cameras were rolling.
Yeah.
And I think everybody in the room was impressed by his explanation, whether you agreed with him or not.
Yeah.
And that was what we needed, even earlier.
Awesome stuff.
So yes, he can handle the press very well. Nowadays, it seems like he's doing it, but he was more content to have other people try to handle it for him for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So awesome. I think that was an opportunity lost at the time.
Awesome. No, but thank you so much for talking to us, and shout out to your family as well. I went through your Facebook and all this other stuff, and I see your son is also out, in the States doing his thing. I think he's a doctor.
No, he's getting his doctorate at Rutgers.
Yeah.
So he managed to stay on, do more studies. He was at NYU, but now he's at Rutgers doing a doctorate, and he's gotten married.
Yeah.
I think I can say that.
Big up. No, you can.
But I've also become a grandfather. And my daughter
We love to hear it. We love to hear
So
it.
yes, the family's doing well, and my youngest has just gone to start his undergraduate. There's a big gap between older brother and younger brother.
With doctorate, that's enough though. Like, I thank you so much, Dr. Ramsay, for coming through. I think we're gonna have to get you back here to talk about more stuff because I don't think we've finished it all. There's so much history and I think because I know the people are gonna love it and ask for more. I hope there will be time in your schedule to talk about other topics. And shout out to Livingston Columbian College for lending us your headmaster. He's really cool. You know, as you can see, he's on the PODI-CAST, and we really appreciate it,
Yeah,
sir.
well, it's good to be here. I think maybe you're the Botswana Joe Rogan.
Oh wow!
We'll
I have to get bald first, but thank you so much for.
No, don't have to get bored. I saw, I've looked at your things on YouTube. Yeah. You're going places with this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We're about to go further with you on, so thank you so much for hanging out with us. And guys, that's our show. Dr. Rukarwa is up next. Keep it locked. Getting healthy on the PODI-CAST.
Different identities. Podcast with PODI-CAST.
All right, welcome back. You're still on the PODI-CAST. You're hanging out with your boy SCAR. And as usual, after our interviews, we're hanging out with Dr. Rukarwa from Rumamed Clinic over there, Kako MRI, right by Block 7. What's up, Dr. Rukarwa? How are you?
Hi, Scar. How's it going?
I'm good, ma. Today we're talking about malaria. I always personalize the stuff because now I was just recently in Maung, and then you said something about, hey, did you take prophylaxis? That got my head spinning as well. So I think this is a perfect time to talk about malaria because it's the season. Can you at least give us a little bit of idea of what malaria is, the condition malaria?
So malaria is an infectious disease that's caused by a parasite, which is transmitted by a female mosquito called Anopheles mosquito. Mm-hmm. So the parasite is called Plasmodium, and there are 5 types that commonly cause malaria, and they differ in different locations of the world in terms of which is more prominent. So it's a disease that's characterized by an infective process where your body's red blood cells get infected by these parasites, and then this results in a myriad of symptoms and can be life-threatening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, like a couple of years ago, I remember in like the 2012s or something, there was a whole campaign in Botswana about eradicating malaria completely to like zero. How are we still talking about it right now? How is it still spreading, and people are still talking about it like it's something new?
Yeah, so I think initially Botswana was doing well in terms of reducing the numbers of incidences and new cases of people with malaria. And it was targeted by the WHO that by 2025, malaria would have been eradicated in Botswana. However, due to various challenges, including climate change, this hasn't happened. Yeah. And as we can see this year, there's been a rise in cases of malaria. And this is because now the mosquito is spreading more, it's surviving longer, and more people are being infected by the disease. So we haven't been able to attain that, and it's an ongoing desire to have it eradicated. Are
there any places in Botswana that are, where it's more rampant than others?
So not all places in Botswana have high cases or high risk of malaria.
Yep.
So it's more common in your northern parts of Botswana, mm-hmm. and this is because of the climatic conditions that favor the survival of the mosquito that transmit malaria. So they prefer hot, humid climates. So you need to have a combination of both the heat as well as the presence of moisture or water. Okay. So you find it's more common in the northern parts of Botswana, your Okavango, Delta areas, Maun areas. Those areas are Chobe areas. Yeah. That's where you find the greatest incidence and prevalence of malaria.
Because we're having all of these flash floods, like what can you say about climate change, and are there any noticeable impacts by climate change on how malaria is being transmitted?
So definitely with climate change, it means that regions where initially the mosquito would not thrive would probably now start thriving, and then you start getting cases of malaria in those areas, especially like in Botswana. And I think that has also led to the failure of us eradicating the disease completely, because the rainfall patterns have changed. Yeah. We're finding now, if you look at this year in Botswana, we've received lots more rain than we thought we normally received. So you find drier areas which are hot, you're not going to have these mosquitoes thriving and surviving for longer.
Yeah.
So the time period by which we would expect the malaria transmission to start slowing down, because there's still humidity and moisture, you find you're going to have the malaria cases prolonged as well. So climate change definitely is having a large impact.
All right, so let's get down to it, because this Anopheles thing is all over the place. And there's these little tiny ones that we have in Gaborone. So these ones are not the problem.
Yes.
These ones we can be relaxed about, because I think a lot of us get scared. It's like, okay, what if those ones carry it? So the Anopheles, is it particular in any way? Is it like big? The tiny ones, the ones you see outside your window, you know?
So there's they basically look the same. It's just the species of the of the mosquito that would actually carry the malaria parasite. And the reason for this is that the Anopheles mosquito needs to feed on animal and human blood so that it reproduces. So they use so it's only the female mosquitoes that actually transmit the disease, so that they're able to produce eggs and multiply. So the parasite only thrives in that specific species. So the species that we have around Gaborone and other non-malaria areas, though we do have mosquitoes, the good thing is that they actually don't make the parasite thrive and are not part of the cycle of survival.
So what are the most effective ways for individuals to protect themselves from malaria?
So I think importantly is education, knowing how malaria is transmitted and spread, knowing areas where it's endemic. For example, like I said, if you're traveling to Maun or to areas or countries where there's a high burden of malaria, it's important to take prophylaxis, because if you don't stay in those places, you don't build immunity. So people who are endemic in these places end up with some immunity. So even though they get bitten by the mosquitoes, not everyone gets the infection because their immune system gets adapted to the infection. So they get less severe or actually don't get malaria. Another thing is important is to dress appropriately. So outdoors during the malaria peak season, to make sure you are wearing long sleeve trousers and shirts to cover up, using mosquito repellents, spraying and use of insecticides treated mosquito nets is important, as well as spraying of homes where you actually are reducing the number and burden of the mosquitoes, and making sure there's no water bodies where there's stagnant water, which allows the mosquito to breed, and getting rid of those and clearing them. And importantly is to get early treatment and diagnosis to prevent complications.
I think also like the drug-resistant malaria strains, we've heard conversations about that, where there's some, drug-resistant types of malaria out there. Can you speak to that as well? And also how accessible malaria treatment is in Botswana?
So I think with most parasites like bacteria or viruses, once there's treatment that has been designed to treat the bug, what happens is genetically and mutation-wise, the organism tries to evade the treatment. So they develop mechanisms genetically that which medication was once used to treat, with time no longer works. So I think we used to know about chloroquine, which was usually the base drug. We're no longer using it for treatment for malaria, because now the mosquitoes, the parasites are resistant to chloroquine. So now new drugs have been developed, which are actually combination drugs, where it's not just one drug that's used, but a combination of different drugs to actually try and reduce the resistant strains. And then that becomes your first line treatment. And the strains and resistant patterns are monitored closely to make sure that when patients do have the disease, what we do give them actually works and treats them from the infection.
Awesome stuff. Thank you.
Medication is available. So the good thing is government hospitals and clinics, especially in endemic areas, once you go in, treatment is available and the drugs are available. We may find a bit of difficulty when it comes to managing severe malaria, which is life-threatening, because initially they need intravenous medication. But in most government facilities, as well as private facilities, once diagnosis is made, medication is available.
Awesome stuff. Dr. Rukara, you can check her out every single Wednesday right here on the PODI-CAST, talking about health. And today, hopefully, you guys learned something a little bit about malaria, because I had forgotten a lot of that stuff. Anopheles mosquito from Integrated Science. We got it back. Thank you so much, Dr. Rukara. She's at RumaMed Clinic right there at MRI, right by Block 7. And that's our show, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to Dr. Ramsay for hanging out as well. We out. Peace.
People of different identities. PODI-CAST with PSCAR.